I'm not much of a bettor. But when a neurologist told us there was a 95% chance that my infant son would have severe neurological impairment and continued seizures for the rest of his life, you can be sure I was betting on the 5% chance that he'd be just fine. 5%. I'll admit, it's not much. And I grabbed hold of it like a lifeline to my son. That 5% was like a sliver of light shining through a dark and scary cloud that formed over my head that day. It was December 3rd, 1994. At 8 months old, my son was diagnosed with a rare form of epilepsy called infantile spasms. I'm sorry to say, I'm not here to tell you a story of beating great odds. It's been nearly 20 years since that diagnosis, and for the past 20 years, my son has suffered daily seizures. For the past 20 years, he's needed full-time care, and for the past 20 years, he has not spoken a word. My son has become to me like a silent Buddha. This is a story of how he taught me to accept a situation that I thought was unacceptable. This is a story of how he taught me to see blessings where I thought there were none. And above all, this is a story of love. When I was 28 years old, my second son, David, was born. He seemed fine at first, but I remember at a couple months old holding him upright, and he'd occasionally drop his head on my shoulder. I thought it was odd, but a second later he'd lift it up again. A few months later, we learned those head drops were actually seizures. Once David started walking, the head drops became body drops, and not just drops, they were forceful falls to the ground on his head. By the time he was 2, he was wearing a helmet nearly all the time, and still there were visits to the emergency room for stitches on his forehead. The type of epilepsy that David has is referred to as refractory epilepsy, meaning the seizures are difficult to control with medications. After trying several strong drugs and witnessing their horrible side effects, we decided to try other options. We started out with things like herbs, vitamin therapy, diet, homeopathy, but the seizures kept coming. So then we tried some more invasive procedures. We had a pacemaker-like device implanted in David's chest, delivering regular impulses to his brain in hopes of calming the brain activity. But still, the seizures kept coming. Between the ages of 3 and 8, David underwent 3 brain surgeries, all in attempts to remove the focus of the seizures. The seizures kept coming. Throughout this time, David's development was suffering. It wasn't just his speech that was lagging, it was his cognition, his memory, his motor skills. He wasn't dressing himself, feeding himself, or using the toilet on his own. Still, I clung to that 5% chance that we would find something one day to stop the seizures, and David would be fine. While other moms were taking their kids to play dates and sports programs, I was bringing David to one therapy after another. Physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, therapeutic horseback riding, neurofeedback sessions. I took him to alternative healers, mystics, monks, naturopathic doctors. We even took him to a remote mountain village in Brazil to see a world-famous healer there. Still, seizures kept coming. When David was around 9, I was talking to a friend of mine about next options for David. And in the middle of the conversation, she leaned in and looked me right in the eye. She said, "Lori, you've got to gain acceptance of David's condition." Acceptance? I couldn't believe she said that word. I've been fighting David's seizures for nearly a decade. Acceptance to me meant rolling over and giving up the fight. I couldn't give up on David. A couple of days after that, I was driving by David's school, and I got stopped at a red light. And there in front of me, I saw a line of kids from David's school crossing the street. Now, I knew they were from his school because they didn't look like typical kids. It was obvious they had some kind of neurologic or physical impairment. And when I saw them, my heart sank. These are my son's peers, I thought. And I felt the weight of that 95% cloud pressing on my heart. But then something happened. As I was sitting there waiting for the light to change, I suddenly became aware of my thoughts and how shitty I was feeling. And I asked myself, what more can I see here? And in that moment, I saw something I had not noticed before. Walking across the street with the kids, I saw the aides helping them across the street, holding a hand, supporting an elbow, pushing a wheelchair. I saw humanity, caring, and compassion. And I thought, my God, this is something my son and his peers can do for the rest of us. They can bring out our humanity. And for a moment, that cloud lifted from my heart, and my heart opened in a way I had not felt before. This was the beginning for me of understanding what acceptance feels like. It felt tender and expansive, like a flower opening up to a new day. One of the greatest revelations for me in coming to understand acceptance was to realize that I had been living its opposite for so long. Fighting David's seizures was like having blinders on. All I could see was what needed to change. I had become a supermom, doing all I could for David and my now 2 other sons. But the truth is, I felt victimized by David's seizures. This was the hand that life had dealt me, and it was not a good one. Still, I put on a good face, and I did all I could to stay positive and just keep going. But the result? My heart had closed. My marriage was suffering, and I woke most mornings with a sinking feeling. I realized that everything I thought and everything I did was based on a judgment that what was happening in David's life was bad, and that I, as his mother, had an obligation to fix it, to make David's life better. And if I wasn't doing that, I was failing as a mother. I was failing David, and I was failing myself. I drove myself crazy over almost all decisions regarding David, from medication changes to the food he should eat, the supplements he should take, how much fresh air he should get. But after that day at the stoplight, I realized I had to take the blinders off. I had to stop judging David's life and judging myself, so I could see the beauty in life that clearly I had been missing. So from that point on, things slowly started to change for me. And believe me, I mean slowly. The next 10 years were years of inner transformation. I started reading personal growth books, spiritual books, attending seminars of spiritual teachers. But most importantly, I started to become more aware of my reactions to David's condition. Now, during this time, I committed to morning meditations. And sometimes when I would meditate, I would reach a blissful state, and it would linger throughout the day. Well, one of these days, David was having a tough time. He had had several seizures, leaving him in an almost catatonic state. And when he would get like this, he'd have no interest in eating or drinking. On a few occasions, he's become so dehydrated, I've had to take him to the emergency room for IV fluids. On this particular day, I was sitting with David on the couch. I was trying to get water into him with a medicinal syringe. It was like trying to get drops of water into a sick bird. In the past, after a couple of hours of this, I would feel depressed. But not on this day. Because of my morning meditation, my energy was high. And I remember thinking to myself, this is really weird. My son is in this horrible state and I'm feeling joyful. It didn't make any sense. I thought I should be feeling sad. And I came to realize that I actually had a belief that as a mother, to show compassion for my child, I should be feeling badly if he is struggling. But I chose to stay in that state. I sang to David. I read to him, all with love and joy in my heart. And I realized something, that this was the place from which I could be a supermom, and not the place of feeling like a victim or feeling depressed. This was another level of understanding, acceptance. Viktor Frankl, author of Man's Search for Meaning, wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." Believe me, I'm still searching for that magic pill to stop David's seizures one day, but I'm no longer fighting them. And I'm no longer hanging on to that 5% chance that his life will be a typical one. Instead, I'm recognizing all of the opportunities I have to change myself. Now, I realize that my story with David is an extreme one. But we all have situations in our lives where something can seem unacceptable. It can be in a difficult relationship, in our career, even a part of ourselves. And the next time you feel resistance coming up, perhaps you can find within yourself your own red light. Stop. Be curious about your thoughts, your feelings, and your beliefs. Ask yourself, what more can I see here? My silent Buddha has taught me to be okay with a situation that doesn't seem okay. My silent Buddha has taught me to let go of judgment so I can open my heart to see the blessings that are inherent in life. Recently, David and I were up at Breadworks on Broadway for lunch. I don't often take David out to restaurants because, quite frankly, David doesn't like to sit in chairs. He prefers to lounge on the couch. Some of you know what I'm talking about, David. Or he likes to lay on the floor. Well, this day at the restaurant, he did sit at the table for a little while. He had a few bites of his food, and as I expected, he was soon up wandering the restaurant, looking for the perfect place to sit. And he found it. It was right in front of the entrance to the restaurant. There was a rug there, and the sunlight was streaming through the door. And customers were coming and going. So I did all I could to maneuver him away from there so he would not lay down in front of the door. Now, in the past, this little struggle with David would leave me feeling frustrated about his behavior, and perhaps even embarrassed in front of strangers. But I don't feel that way anymore. I nuzzled my head into David's legs when I do that, smiling at him and loving him. My silent Buddha has also taught me that this little interaction here is what really matters in life. Simply loving one another. Thank you.